is the hour, Steven Hour. We are back with another James Bond movie review. Now, because of that, let's get on with it. Here we're kicking off with the second film in the franchise, From Russia with Love. Now, a bit of backstory. After the first huge success of the first film, Dr. No, the filmmakers immediately knew that a sequel was going to be made. And also keep in mind, the films were made out of chronological order. So the hardest bit usually was what film could we adapt next. After looking around for what possible film, the President of America at the time, John F. Kennedy, said that one of his favorite books of all time was Ian Fleming's From Russia with Love, and it is often considered by many in the series as one of the best written Bond books. It has a really good plot, and it's just an overall entertaining book. Now, because of that, the filmmakers knew that that's what they needed to do. They needed to do that for their next movie. And also when they did, they brought back the original cast who helped land the first film. Terrence Young was brought back to direct after his smashing success in the first film, directing the first film. Sean Connery, of course, naturally returned for Bond. Many of the supporting characters that are pretty much essential for all Bond movies returned. But also here, John Barry will be promoted to do the score for the remainder of the film series, and I think it was best because compared to the first one, I feel that there was a huge improvement. And as a result, when it came to the overall adapting the screenplay and the script for the movie, the creators had the good idea to not change as much in the novel, as that's why many people like the book, so they thought a little change was necessary. The only main change that was really made to the movie from the book was having the criminal organization Spectre make their return and be the main villain. Because see, as in the novel, the main villains were actually Smersh, which were mostly a group of Russians. You must understand, these films were taking place during the Cold War, and it was still in full swing, and not wanting to not just have the films be dated, but at the same time, they don't want to avoid any political controversy. So that was a smart choice. Another thing also I want to point out that the film did is overall, it is often considered by many as an absolute classic of the series. But is it? Let's get to that in the review. And of course, at the end, I'll share my full thoughts. But first, let's get to the cast. The casting of the film, pretty much, again, just like many Bond films of the day during the 60s, and even films overall, it often comprised of little-known actors or character actors. Of course, Sean Connery gladly returned in the role of James Bond. James Bond is still considered by many to be the best. And who knows, one day when I get to do my, rankings of personal James Bonds, we might find out where he is placed. Maybe he might be first, maybe he might be at the bottom, maybe somewhere in the middle. Our Bond girl for this film is Titania Roma, played by Dilana Benici. Sorry if I'm really pronouncing some of these actors' names wrong, but it's just a little bit hard to really pronounce. Overall, her, honestly, I must admit, out of all she's one of those 60s Bond girls that for me is she's not fully forgettable. The character is alright, but honestly, I admit I really forget the character. When, this Bond girl just doesn't show up on really much Bond lists, if I must be honest. Yeah, I can't explain it. The character's really good in this film, but she doesn't appear on Bond lists, let alone, I honestly do tend to forget the inclusion. So I will admit to that. But here we do have two people who are never forgotten. Robert Shaw as Red Grant, the assassin, and arguably the series' first proper henchman. People like to say that Professor Dent was, but I don't really think so. Well, at least doesn't fit the type. I also must admit that Red Grant was the first of the classic. You know, if you were in a Bond film and you had blonde hair and you were of Russian descent, you were the bad guy. But here he managed to add some character. He's basically an assassin who does his job and has a sort of, and is a little bit, you can almost get the characters a little bit uneven. Something's completely off his rocker. Overall, a really great and really memorable character for me. Another we have is Rosa Klebb, another famous Bond villain, and arguably is one of the first many secondary villains. And Rosa Klebb was portrayed by Latia Liani. I believe that name is pronounced right. And basically is the number 3 member in the Spectre organization. Number 3, and is pretty much there to make sure that the plot of the film goes off without any any muck-ups. Rounding out the cast, of course, is Bernard Lee as M and Lois Maxwell as Moneypenny, pretty much returning in here. They just play secondary roles and are just honestly there. But one of the most interesting things about this film is Q, the proper Q, making his debut. Desmond Llewellyn as Q is forever remembered as the definitive Q in the series. Here he makes his first proper screen debut and we are introduced to his classic gadgets, okay? But we don't get to go into Q's famous lab in this film. That wouldn't come until films later. But here he leaves definitely an impression, and believe it or not, he is one of those people who really stayed in the role up until he couldn't anymore. You know, the age finally caught up with him, so that's what makes him special. We are also introduced to a fantastic Bond ally, Kadembe, played by Pedro Almandanzara. Sad story about this actor. During the time of making this film, he was in very, very poor health and basically struggled to get through. But he continued to do so, so he knew that the money he was being paid for this film, he knew it would go for his family. Eventually, after he had wrapped all his scenes, he was admitted to hospital, but sadly, he took his own life. Yeah, that's dark. And as far as I know, the money was given to his family, and it really shook the cast because everyone loved him. Sean Connery loved him, and it was a huge shock, but the film still pressed on. Other casts include the introduction to one of the most iconic villains in Bond and cinema history, the infamous Blofeld, although he's not called that, but is simply referred to as number 1. Also, we don't get to see him at all. We see the cat, we see the hands, and he's pretty much uncredited in this film. However, the hands that are used to pet Blofeld are actually Anthony Dawson's. You know, the guy that played Professor Dent is pretty much here, and the voice was done by a completely different guy. I like how he's not seen, he's hidden in mystery, and there's a lot of, I guess, tension raised, wondering who the hell is this guy. And yeah, he definitely leaves an impression. Sometimes you don't have to have a face to leave an impression on a film. We also have Spectre number. We have Kronstein, portrayed by Vladek Shembol. Now, he is pretty much another high-ranking member in the Spectre organization, and he is pretty much the person who's responsible for the masterminding of this plan. Another person that is very interesting to make a debut in this film is this guy. Morzeny, I believe is his name, and he's portrayed by Walter Gotell, and would actually, in the Sean Connery film era, would come back to play a very special role and essentially become a sort of special character for the film franchise. Now that's about the cast. Let's actually get on to actually doing the film. Our film opens again with another James Bond gun barrel scene. But here it starts very differently. When compared to the first film with that whole bright Spectre colours, we are then transitioned into a very dark, very atmospheric scene where Bond is on the run in his tuxedo. He has his wealth of PPK, but he looks scared. He's being chased by Red Grant, of course, and there is very little music. The tension is slowly building, and we see that honestly, something's just out of place already. And then next thing you know, Bond is killed by Red Grant, who has had this wire within his watch which he uses to strangle Bond to death. After that, it is then revealed to be some kind of training exercise with these criminals training Red Grant to kill, and it turns out that this Bond was actually a different man, was actually a different person. Something I want to point out before going further is that all the Bond films, at least in the early days, would try to do a special gimmick of faking Bond's death. At least 3 films in the Sean Connery era did that. And honestly, for me, this is actually one of the best versions, best ways to do so, and it really is a good way to open up the Bond film. Here we're introduced to the pre-credit sequence, or pre-title sequence. I think it's what the term is. Basically, after the gun barrel, we have this sort of clip, or at least like a 5-minute video, sort of introducing us to either the plot of the overall film or something that is somehow connected to the actual film. Basically, it's to get us hyped for the film ahead. But before we do that, we then get into the classic title sequences, where, you know, we get the cast, the name, and here is also interesting is the how it's more the classic, like the names are on a beautiful woman, practically not fully naked, but yeah, kind of there. It's definitely the first. It's definitely the first to do so of that. But at the same time, we are also introduced to the movie's theme. You see, by this film and onwards, each James Bond movie would have a theme song, and here it's an instrumental, and I actually like it. If I could redo a Bond theme song list down the line, or redo it, this would definitely appear somewhere. I like just the overall feel of it. It's nice, it's calming. But if I could complain, one thing about the title sequences is how it's kind of executed. Don't get me wrong, it is influential with the whole the names and the positions of people, you know, all that on the woman. But it does sometimes get distorted where you can't really read it. I will admit to that, but it is definitely there. The influence from this came from here, so I like it immensely. After that, we are then cut to a scene where Krotstein is playing chess until he is called away to meet with the heads of Spectre. Here, this whole scene, we are introduced to the overall plot of the film. You see, Krotstein and Spectre plans to steal a lector, a device that was used, that the Russians have, and knowing that the British want. They then set an elaborate plan to have the British steal it from the Russians. They would then steal it from the British, and as a result, they would then sell it back to the Russians. Now, to do this, they need the help of the British, but they know that the British will know it's a trap, but they'll gladly, you know, do it because they desperately want the lector. Here, they're going to need a woman from the Russian consulate, one of their own top assassins. And, of course, Krotstein also knows that this will be a perfect opportunity to kill James Bond, who they know will be put on this assignment as to get revenge from the death of one of their best operatives, Dr. No. He clearly indicating some continuity with the first film, something I absolutely like. Now, sometimes the continuity in these films can be weird at best. They can be intertwined coherently or distorted. And here, we are also set, and as a result, we set up the plot. As a result, Rosa Klebb goes to Spectre Island to get Red Grant to recruit him as the assassin. And of course here we get Titania, yeah, the woman to, participate in his plan. As we go to Spectre Island, we also see this whole training exercise of how they train their operatives, a very interesting scene, and also how we also set up Titania's character, how she is pretty much almost intimidated to be forced into this. After that, we then snapshot to where Bond is right now, with Sylvia Trench, of course, from the previous film, On a Sort of Day, before he gets called in to M's office and is debriefed about the whole, the situation, how this woman plans to defect from the Russians and would gladly help them give them their hands on the Lecter if Bond accompanies it, because she's fallen in love with Bond. Now, they know something's fishy, they know that this is not on the level, but it's a chance to get the Lecter, so hell, let's go with it. Here, we are also introduced to Q, who gives Bond his very first gadget in the series, the suitcase gadget, where basically there's hidden ammo, hidden gold sockets. Here, he's also his build it yourself rifle, I like to call it. And here we're also introduced to the whole briefcase's special talcum powder trick. Here, because of this, this sets up for the gadget to eventually be used in the film. Bond then makes his way to Russia in Turkey, where he meets Kerem Bey. And here in this scene, we get a sort of cat and mouse. No one knows who's... Yeah, sort of a cat and mouse feel. Has the Russians go up against Kerem Bey as it's sort of like a neutral peace treaty type place. And they know that they have to find a way to get their hands on Lecter. And here we also introduce just to Kerem Bey's overall character. And he becomes a very likable person. And you can definitely tell he's just a person that you just love to have around. Bond then goes to his hotel room, and of course he quickly gets a new one. The bit about the hotel room bit I really gotta admit that I don't like is just how they played the Bond music kinda out of nowhere and doesn't feel in place where it should be, if I could be honest. He then of course gets his new hotel room, and around about this time, a Russian that has been tailing the Kerem Bey organization is killed, resulting in them having a retaliation against the Russians having retaliation against Kerem Bey. Bond then comes in and finds out how the Russians have broken the treaty, as Kerem Bey does not know why. They then make their way to, after that, they then go underground city in the sewer, where they go underneath a Russian conference room, I guess you would say, where they're having this sort of conversation with all these officials. Here, and here Bond gets a little bit of a sneak peek at who this woman is, because he's never met her in person. And realizing that the dangers they were in, especially since at the conference there is a person named Kalinko, a notorious hitman that Kerem Bey obviously has some history with, they decide to make their way to a gypsy camp to stay the night, away from Bond's hotel, thinking it'll be safe. While he's there, of course, he witnesses the gypsy, gypsy festivities, and eventually then just as things get tensions are rolling up, then a fight breaks out between the gypsies and Kalinko and his men, with Bond helping out. This is a really great action scene. I just love it so much, and I like how Bond he's shooting, but he just helps where he can. Eventually, I also liked how, as this thing is, we see Red Grant in the shadows, and believe it or not, Red Grant saves Bond's life. A guy was about to kill Bond in the back, but Red Grant kills him before he could. But this confuses Bond and sort of adds more to the plot and more of the feel of a cat and mouse. Of course, the gypsies, Bond, and Kerem Bey win, and Kalinko and his men, of course, have to retreat. And after interrogating some of the prisoners, they find out that they were after Kerem Bey. Realizing they need to lay low a bit, they still stay at the gypsy camp. After that, Bond and Cannonbay eventually track down Kalinko to his hideout, where the foldable rifle comes into play. Bond wants to take the shot, but Cannonbay must, feeling that he needs this. As a result, he gives Cannonbay the rifle, and as Kalinko tries to make him escape, Cannonbay shoots him, and he falls to his death. Bond shoots out a witty one-liner, and that's the end of that. Bond then returns to his hotel with the, returns to the hotel with the threat all done, and here he finally gets to meet the Bond girl of the movie. The scene plays out how you would expect Bond to handle it, with his suave charm and sophistication, and of course ends how you would expect Bond with any pretty girl. Just as this is happening, they are secretly being filmed from behind a window. As a result of this, Bond and Cannonbay eventually secretly get the plans from the Bond girl, Titania, get the plans to essentially break into the Russian consulate to get the Lecter. And just as they do get the plans, one of the Russian guys is killed by Red Grant, but Bond is curious what is really going on. Eventually, Kedem, Bond, and Titania put in a plan to steal the Lecter, get on a train. And just as they get on a train, Red Grant is also on the train, and another KGB official, or agent at least, quickly gets on the train, and they head to, and they just travel. For this part of the film, the majority takes on the train. Here, they deal with the Russian, the KGB agent that's also on the train. They tie him up, and sadly, Cannonbay also gets killed along with the KGB agent, off-screen and presumably by Red Grant. Definitely by Red Grant. By this point, Bond has really had it with being a pawn in this game, and he lets out a bit of his anger. Now, this can be justified by some people, saying, well, she knows something, he is an agent, you don't like this stuff, but this is stuff that needs to be done. Others saying, no, it just doesn't feel right Bond hitting around a woman. Again, it's entirely up to you how you process this scene. And I'm kind of yes and no. I mean, he does kind of slowly regret it, realizing that she doesn't know much as well. She is just as much as a pawn and feels a little bit of guilt with what he's done. So yeah, that could be. Eventually, as they stop at a train station, because they end up stopping at a train station, Bond has to inform one of the contacts there that Cannonbay is dead. They need to get a message to M and bring in a new operative at the next station. But he doesn't know he's secretly being overheard by Red Grant. They quickly make their way to the next station, and Bond runs into Red Grant, who has taken up the identity of the agent and quickly gets on. Another thing I also want to point out before the Bond meets Red Grant scene, or thinking he's another British agent, he there's a scene where Bond and Titania essentially sort of bond, and it was slightly before Cannonbay's death scene, and I just like how the film just really shows a light-sided Bond, and even he's starting to be a little bit attracted to her, but also at the same time fond of her. Of course, then of course the whole Cannonbay scene. Then of course he doesn't know what to believe, how to to really trust her. So I kind of like that. I really do. As Bond and that gets settled in with Red Grant, who's taken on the alias Captain Nash, Bond feels something's a bit off with him. He checks his briefcase. He thinks it's on the up and up. He gets to the light cart where the cart where they are eating, and he notices what he's ordered to eat. He's secretly putting something in his drink. Not his drink. The girl's drink. Eventually she feels ill, falls over, and Bond, by this time, realizes something's really not up, pulls a gun on so-called Captain Nash and asks what's going on. Red manages to talk himself out of it a little bit, and of course knocks Bond out. Bond, at this scene, he takes Bond's lighter away, he puts the silencer on his gun, and when Bond gets up, he tells him to pretty much sit there on his knees and put his hands in his pockets. And as a result, Bond finally connects the pieces. It is Spectre. This is all Spectre's doing. Spectre's been playing both sides to get the Lecter and to also do away with Bond. But they just don't want to kill him. They want his death to be a humiliating one. So they plan to have it a sort of... The girl planted evidence that the girl shot him after he refused to marry her. And then she would then commit suicide. They would steal the Lecter, sell it off to the Russians, and here this will make the Bond in death a laughingstock to British intelligence. I like the scene how he fully explains the whole plot, and also at the same time, you know, not just pieces come together, but Bond is literally at death's door. He can't charge Red knowing he would shoot him on sight. So he has to find a way out. So he talks him into opening his case, saying that there's a gold sovereign, you know, to pay for one last cigarette before he dies. Again, Bond smoked a lot during the, you know, I guess from Connery's films all the way to the end of Timothy Dalton's. Really, he was a smoker. And of course, Bond, the famous talcum powder gadget we were introduced to, comes into play, and a fight breaks out between Red Grant and Bond. Now this scene is really brutal, it's well choreographed, and here you really believe that Bond is not out of the woods yet. He is really fighting for his life here. Of course, Bond wins by using Red's famous wristwire gadget against him, and as a result, kills Red Grant, and of course, rips off a one-liner. Bond then takes advantage of Red's escape plan that he showed him earlier, and quickly gets him and Titania quickly out. But they're not fully out of the woods yet. They get chased by a helicopter, which results in Bond doing a, I think it's a, I can't remember that film, but it's a clear reference. It was an Alfred Hitchcock film. You deal with this, like, Bond being chased by the helicopter. It's a kind of a reference and an homage to that. Bond, of course, quickly gets out of it, and of course, a one-liner, and then quickly gets to a boat and drives off. Here we then cut scene to Blofeld and Rosa Klebb and Krosstein asking how the problem went wrong. Rosa Klebb saying it's Krostein's fault as it was his plan. Krosstein says it was her fault because he chose the people. And it seemed for a while Blofeld is backing Krostein's side and calls in Orozco in to essentially do away with Rosa Klebb. Now the scene is built up. You're thinking Rosa's gonna die, but it ends up being Krosstein who ends up getting killed. And you could see just the terror on her face. I like how it was built up, and now she has to quickly fix this mess quickly before it is, you know, destroyed. As a result, as Bond and Titania are on the boat driving away, they end up getting chased by the Spectres, like all the members of Spectre, their whole gang, you know, every member, including Lorenzo, and it results in a fight, you know, at least a water fight, and he ends up dropping a few oil tankers into the ocean, which have been leaked, you know, linked with oil around the boat. He then quickly gets a flare gun and shoots at the oil, resulting in a big fire explosion, and the boats catch on fire, the hoods catch on fire, and everything, you know, just goes to chaos. I actually read in a at least in a documentary, that the fire actually literally did get out of hand on set, and ended up destroying a camera, and people actually got badly burned. I'm surprised that they managed to actually complete this film, because they had so many troubles on production, and they almost thought that they weren't going to get through it. Really, and I'm surprised they did. After that boat scene, we cut to Bond and Titania in a hotel room, where Rosa Klebb makes one final attempt to get the Lecter, resulting in a fight between Bond and Rosa Klebb, with Titania holding a gun and deciding who to kill. She then ends up shooting Rosa, killing her, and Bond lets off a one-liner. Now, in the novel, at the end, by this scene, Bond actually gets hit by one of the knives, well, gets scratched by one of the knives, and ends up on the verge of death, and the book ends there, as a sort of cliffhanger for the next novel. Of course, they needed a happy ending for this film, so as a result, they made it that they float down this boat. Her and Titania, he throws away the roll of film that Red gave him, and they end up kissing. It's done by this projection, a very poorly done one. I understand this was in the 60s, and the budget for this film was slightly more than what they had on the original. So I understand that they're not all there. The production, you have to cut costs with what you can. The film then ends not just with them, essentially kissing, but also when the credits roll, it says that Bond will be back in Goldfinger, and we end the film there. Wow, that was a really long synopsis, long in-depth plot, but yeah, From Russia with Love is considered one of the best and an absolute classic of the Bond films, and I have to agree. One of the things I love about it is it takes full advantage of the Cold War, and the fact that it is a spy thriller. Again, the film by this point hasn't had the full formula. It hasn't come to that. So as a result, when you watch it, it's more of a Cold War spy thriller than a James Bond movie. But it does introduce some elements that you would come to expect. Some of the famous version of Q's introduction, the gadgets, the pre-title sequences, and the title sequence itself, and of course the overall plot I actually find really great and invested with. Now, as a result, I like to point out that some people say just because you adapt a plot faithfully doesn't mean it's gonna be all that good. Well, I can agree to some points. I absolutely enjoyed this film. I like it, and it's definitely up there in my top. Definitely up there in one of my favorite Bond films of all time. It's really up there. It is a fantastic film, well directed, well written, well performed. Yeah, but it does suffer some things from Dr. No, as in, yes, it is dated. It has some of that datedness that you see. And it also suffers from some, like the cut scenes, the jump cuts. Again, I can forgive that in this film, because I feel they really brought their A game for this. I really did, compared to Dr. No, and understand that it was a film from a different time. Now, this is said to be Sean Connery's favourite Bond film to work on. This was his favourite, and I have to agree. And when reading behind the scenes of how they even managed to successfully make this film, considering all the problems they had, I'm surprised they did. This is a really fantastic Bond film. It's well written, well done, and it is a film definitely worth checking out for any hardcore Bond fan. I highly recommend it. It may not be a more traditional Bond film, as in the early films, especially before Goldfinger, they were trying to figure out the formula yet. But half the formula's in here, just like it was with Dr. No. But it wouldn't be till Goldfinger when all the pieces were finally put into play. And there we have it. That's the review of From Russia with Love, an absolute Bond classic. It does suffer from some datedness, but I feel that it is definitely an absolute fantastic film in the series. Join us next time as we review the third Bond film in the series, and from what many people consider the gold standard for any James Bond film. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be reviewing Goldfinger. And so, until next time, this has been The Hour, the Steven Hour. So long for now.